Hey there, welcome back. For another deep dive today, we're going to be exploring something a little different.
Ooh, I like different.
Yeah, we're not diving into like a specific news story or a scientific breakthrough this time. We're going to be using a popular TV show.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, to kind of unlock some interesting vocabulary and grammar
Okay.
and cultural insights that can help you
Right.
on your journey to becoming a more confident English speaker.
I'm excited about this one. It's a really fun way to approach language learning,
Yeah.
and you see how it connects to the stories that we consume.
Exactly. And the show we're going to be unpacking is HBO's White Lotus.
Okay.
You might have heard of it. It's won a ton of awards, and everybody seems to be talking about it.
Yeah, especially with season 3 on the horizon. What's so fascinating about White Lotus is that it's more than just a typical TV drama.
Right.
It offers some really, sharp commentary on society, particularly around wealth and privilege,
Yeah,
which are themes that are just woven into the fabric of American culture.
right. And don't worry, even if you haven't seen the show, you can still get a lot out of this deep dive. We're not going to be focusing on spoilers or plot details.
Right.
Instead, we're going to be using the show as a springboard to explore some key English language concepts
Yeah.
and see how they play out in a real-world context.
Think of it as a behind-the-scenes look at how language works, using the world of White Lotus as our stage.
Okay, so for those who haven't had a chance to catch the show yet, White Lotus, basically, it revolves around a group of wealthy vacationers at a luxurious resort.
Right.
But things aren't always as picture-perfect as they might seem. There's dark humor, social commentary,
Okay.
and a whole lot of drama unfolding beneath the surface.
It's interesting how the show uses these idyllic locations
Yeah,
to highlight the contrast between the beauty of the surroundings and then the often messy and complicated lives of the characters.
yeah.
It makes you question whether luxury is really about material possessions or if it's a state of mind or maybe even a way to escape real problems.
That's such a good point. And speaking of luxury, let's take a moment to break down this word and see how it's used in the context of the show. Now, luxury, can you say that with me?
Luxury.
Perfect. So luxury refers to a state of great comfort, elegance, and often involves expensive things or experiences. For example, you might say, the White Lotus Resort offers its guests a life of luxury, with private beaches, gourmet meals, and personalized service.
And what's interesting is that the show doesn't just show the glamorous side of luxury.
Right.
It also explores the potential downsides,
Yeah.
like how it can create a sense of entitlement or foster superficial relationships,
Yeah.
and even lead to moral dilemmas.
Absolutely. And that brings us to another important word from the show, moral dilemmas. Can you say that? Moral dilemmas.
Moral dilemmas.
Great. Now, a moral dilemma is a situation where someone has to choose between two or more options that are all considered morally right or wrong.
Okay.
But there's no easy or clear answer. It's like being caught between a rock and a hard place.
We see this play out a lot in White Lotus when characters are faced with choices that challenge their values and have consequences that extend beyond themselves. So for example, Quinn, the teenage son in the first season, he faces a moral dilemma when he has to choose between pleasing his family by going to college
Yeah,
and pursuing his newfound passion for nature and a simpler way of life.
that's a perfect example. It shows how moral dilemmas aren't just about abstract concepts.
Right.
They're about real people grappling with tough choices that can have a ripple effect on those around them.
Exactly. And sometimes even good intentions can lead to unintended consequences.
Right.
And it makes you think about the gray areas of morality and how there isn't always a clear right or wrong answer, especially when you're dealing with these complex human relationships.
Now, let's move on to another word that pops up a lot in White Lotus, privilege. Can you repeat that?
Privilege.
Excellent. Now, privilege refers to the special advantages or benefits that some people have based on their social status, wealth, race, or other factors. It's like having an invisible head start in life that others may not have.
And we see privilege at play throughout the show, often contrasting the experiences of the wealthy guests with those of the resort staff. For example, in the first season, we see Tanya, a wealthy and somewhat self-absorbed guest, expecting special treatment from the staff and just being completely oblivious to their struggles and the challenges they face outside the walls of the resort.
That's such a great example of how privilege can manifest in everyday interactions.
Right.
It could affect how people perceive the world, the opportunities they have access to, and even how they treat others.
It's almost like an invisible force that shapes the characters' relationships and their interactions.
Right. And now let's talk about interpersonal relationships. Can you say interpersonal?
Interpersonal.
Perfect. So interpersonal simply means relating to relationships or communication between people.
White Lotus is packed with fascinating examples of interpersonal dynamics. You see couples struggling to connect, or families grappling with secrets and resentments, and even strangers forming these unlikely bonds. Speaking of interpersonal issues, the tension between Shane and Rachel in the first season
Good one.
is a prime example of how wealth can warp expectations in a relationship.
That's a good one. For those who haven't seen it, Shane and Rachel start out all lovey-dovey, but their honeymoon quickly turns sour as Shane's sense of entitlement and Rachel's insecurities clash with the realities of married life, especially in the context of his wealthy family's expectations.
It's a great example of how interpersonal conflicts can arise from differences in values or communication styles, or even just the pressures of trying to maintain a certain image.
Absolutely. And it makes you think about how these kinds of conflicts play out in our own lives.
Right.
Whether it's with family, friends, or even colleagues at work.
It's a reminder that communication is key. But even with the best intentions, misunderstandings can happen, especially when there are underlying power dynamics at play.
Right. Well, I think we've unpacked quite a few vocabulary treasures already, would you say?
We have, and we've only just scratched the surface of what White Lotus has to offer.
Exactly. So before we dive into some grammar practice and deeper analysis of the show's themes, let's take a quick break to let those new words sink in.
Okay. All right, are you ready to put some of that vocabulary into action? And maybe explore a grammar point that's essential for discussing White Lotus and many other topics in English.
I'm ready, and I bet our listener is eager to level up their English skills too. So let's talk grammar. What do we got for us today?
Today, we're going to be focusing on the present perfect tense. Now, this tense might seem a bit tricky at first, but it's actually quite useful for talking about experiences or actions that have happened at an unspecified time in the past, and might even be ongoing. So it's like when you want to talk about something that has happened in your life, but the exact moment it happened isn't the most important part.
Right.
It's more about the experience itself and how it connects to the present.
Exactly. And in White Lotus, the present perfect tense comes up all the time.
It does.
Because we're often talking about the characters' experiences and how they've been shaped by their pasts.
Right.
For example, you might say, the characters have faced many challenges during their stay at the White Lotus. Can you try saying that?
The characters have faced many challenges during their stay at the White Lotus.
Perfect. You nailed it. Now, notice how we use have, plus the past participle of the verb face, which is faced, to form the present perfect tense. It's a simple formula, but it allows us to talk about a whole range of experiences in a very natural way.
Right. And you can also use the present perfect tense to ask questions about someone's experiences. For instance, you might ask a friend, have you ever stayed at a luxury resort? Or have you seen the latest episode of White Lotus?
Those are great examples. Now let's put your listening skills to the test. In the materials for this deep dive, we have a short clip from an interview with the show's creator. And they mention that the characters are all dealing with some pretty intense moral dilemmas. Remember, we talked about those earlier.
Yes, those tricky situations where the characters are forced to make tough choices with no easy answers.
Exactly. Now, I won't give away any spoilers, but I want you to think about this question. What kinds of moral dilemmas might wealthy vacationers encounter at a fancy resort like the White Lotus? So think about the things that we've been talking about. Privilege, relationships, and maybe the temptations that come with having a lot of money and free time.
It's interesting to consider how the setting of the show might amplify these dilemmas. Like being in a place of luxury surrounded by people with different values and priorities could definitely create some challenging situations for these characters.
Absolutely. It's almost like the resort itself becomes a character in the story, influencing the choices people make and the consequences they face. Now, let's shift gears and talk about something that's sure to spark some lively conversation. In that same interview, the show's creator mentioned something pretty intriguing. They said that one of the main themes of the upcoming season is spiritual seeking.
Ooh, that's interesting. I wonder how they'll explore that theme in the context of a luxury resort setting. It seems a bit counterintuitive, doesn't it?
You'd think that people on vacation would be more focused on relaxation and indulgence than soul searching. But that's what makes White Lotus so fascinating. It constantly challenges our expectations and makes us think about things in new ways.
I wonder if the characters will be seeking spiritual fulfillment as a way to fill a void in their lives. Maybe something that material wealth and luxury just haven't been able to provide.
That's a great point. It makes you think about whether true happiness comes from external things or if it's something we have to cultivate within ourselves.
Exactly. And the setting of a luxury resort with all its temptations and distractions could make that spiritual journey even more challenging and complex for the characters.
I can't wait to see how it all plays out. Now, to really get those conversational juices flowing, let's consider this question. What do you think the impact of wealth is on the characters' relationships?
That's a great question. We've seen in previous seasons how wealth can both bring people together and tear them apart. On the one hand, it can create a sense of security and freedom, allowing people to indulge in experiences they might not otherwise have access to.
Right, but on the other hand, it can also breed a sense of entitlement or create power imbalances and lead to conflicts over money, status, or even just different values and priorities.
It's like money becomes a magnifying glass, intensifying both the positive and negative aspects of these relationships.
Exactly. It's a reminder that wealth doesn't necessarily equate to happiness or like strong relationships.
Right.
It's how people use their wealth and how it affects their interactions with others that really matters.
Right, and I think White Lotus does a brilliant job of exploring those nuances and showing how wealth can be both a blessing and a curse when it comes to human connections.
Now, let's zoom out a bit and look at White Lotus through a wider cultural lens. We mentioned earlier that the show offers some commentary on American culture, particularly around wealth and privilege.
Right.
But I think these themes resonate far beyond the borders of the United States.
I agree. The pursuit of wealth and status, the complexities of family dynamics, and the search for meaning and purpose are all like universal human experiences that people can relate to no matter where they're from.
Absolutely. And understanding these themes could be incredibly helpful for navigating English conversations because they often pop up in discussions about current events, books, movies, and even just like everyday life. So even if you haven't watched White Lotus, thinking about these issues can help you connect with others and engage in more meaningful discussions.
That's a great point. It's like the show gives us a shared vocabulary to talk about these important issues, even if we haven't all had the same experiences.
Exactly. And you know what? I think it's time for another round of vocabulary exploration. What do you say?
Let's do it. I'm ready to unlock some more linguistic gems from the world of White Lotus.
Perfect. Well, let's see. One word that comes to mind when I think about some of the characters in White Lotus is entitled. Can you say that with me? Entitled.
Entitled, exactly. And in the show creators interview, they mentioned that the new season will feature a guest star whose appearance will like really shake things up at the White Lotus Resort and create these unexpected ripples in the characters' lives.
I can't wait to see who they cast and how this new character will like disrupt the dynamics at the resort.
It's always exciting to see how these guest stars interact with the existing cast and what secrets or motivations they bring to the table.
Right. It's like they're throwing a grenade into this already volatile mix of personalities and watching the sparks fly.
I wonder if the guest star will be a force for good or chaos. Or, maybe a bit of both.
That's the beauty of White Lotus. You never quite know what to expect. And speaking of the unexpected, let's consider this question. Do you think external forces, like the arrival of a new person, can truly change who we are? Or are we ultimately responsible for our own choices and destinies, regardless of the circumstances?
That's a question that philosophers have been debating for centuries. It's like the age-old nature versus nurture debate.
Right. On the one hand, you could argue that our environment and the people we encounter shape our personalities and influence our decisions.
But on the other hand, you could also argue that we have free will and the power to choose our own path, regardless of those external influences.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. And I think White Lotus does a great job of exploring both sides of the coin, showing how characters are both shaped by their circumstances and capable of making choices that defy expectations.
I agree. It's a reminder that we're not just products of our environment. We have agency and the ability to shape our own destinies.
All right, I think it's time for one last round of vocabulary expansion before we wrap up this deep dive. Are you ready to unlock a few more linguistic gems?
I'm always up for expanding my vocabulary. What have you got for us this time?
Well, let's see. One word that comes to mind when I think about the emotional complexities of White Lotus is ambivalent. Can you say that with me? Ambivalent?
Ambivalent.
Perfect. Ambivalent describes a state of having mixed feelings or contradictory emotions about something or someone. It's like you're torn between two opposing forces, feeling both attraction and repulsion, or both hope and fear.
We see a lot of ambivalence in White Lotus as characters grapple with difficult decisions or navigate complex relationships and confront their own conflicting desires.
It's like they're caught in this emotional tug of war, unsure of which path to take or which feelings to trust.
Exactly. And it makes you realize that human emotions are rarely simple or straightforward. We're often just a jumble of conflicting thoughts and feelings.
All right, let's move on to another word that captures a common emotional state we see in White Lotus. Discontented. Can you repeat that? Discontented.
Discontented.
Perfect. Discontented describes a state of dissatisfaction or unease, often stemming from a sense of lacking something or feeling unfulfilled in one's current circumstances.
We see a lot of discontentment among the characters in White Lotus. Despite their wealth and privilege, many of them are still searching for something more, yearning for a deeper sense of purpose or connection.
It's like they have all the material comforts they could ever want, but they're still not truly happy.
Exactly. It makes you question whether happiness is something we can buy or achieve through external means, or if it's something we have to cultivate within ourselves.
All right, one last word before we wrap things up. This one is nostalgic, pronounced nostalgic.
Nostalgic.
Perfect. Nostalgic describes a sentimental longing or wistful affection for the past, often accompanied by a sense of loss or a yearning for simpler times.
We see characters experiencing nostalgia in White Lotus as they reminisce about past relationships or childhood memories, or even just like a bygone era when life seemed less complicated.
It's like they're looking back with rose-colored glasses, longing for a time when things felt more innocent or carefree.
Exactly, and it makes you think about how our memories shape our present experiences and how the past can both comfort us and haunt us.
All right, I think we've covered a lot of ground today, exploring vocabulary, grammar, and some pretty deep themes, all through the lens of White Lotus.
It's been a fascinating journey, and I hope iListener feels inspired to continue exploring the show and the English language with a fresh perspective.
So even if you haven't booked a stay at the White Lotus, I hope this deep dive has equipped you with some new linguistic tools and sparked some interesting thoughts about the show's themes and characters.
And remember, the beauty of language learning is that it's an ongoing journey. There's always more to discover, more to learn, and more ways to connect with the world around you.
So until our next deep dive, keep those ears tuned, those minds curious, and keep unlocking the world one word at a time. CCS.
Thanks for joining today's chat on Your Daily English Spark. If you enjoyed this session and want to keep improving your English, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. What topic would you like us to cover next? Let me know in the comments. And don't miss our next episode, where we'll dive into mastering small talk. See you next time.